Welcome to UX Patter Season 3, where I, Dushyant Kanungo, talk to the leaders in the design field about their journey and what inspires them to be the best. I also touch upon the aspects of the industry such as jobs, trends, and challenges, to name a few. This podcast is presented by Galaxy UX Studio and powered by Galaxy Weblinks, an Inc. 5000 company. Hello, everyone. This is Dushyant, your host for the podcast UX Banter. This is whole new season 3, and you are welcome once again to another episode, which I promise that is going to be as exciting as you have enjoyed the rest of the episode so far. And I'd like to thank our sponsors, Galaxy Studio, to help us put this podcast out there for all of you to enjoy. Today's guest to our podcast is a true designer, is someone who channelizes his passion for design to help and serve others. Our guest today is one such designer who is in his 15 years of career, has worked on some cutting-edge design solutions to help those in need. Having 3 degrees and a Ph.D. under his belt, he is a skillful designer, researcher, developer, and a professor. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome the Director of Product Design at Maple, Carmen Branje.
Thanks for inviting me on.
So welcome to the show, and I hope that you're doing all good and all settled with the Canadian weather and everything.
Yeah, we're getting one more blast of winter right now. Hopefully it probably won't be.
The winter of 22 departs.
Yeah.
So, Carmen, when going through your profile, there are so many things which are so fascinating. You are a researcher, you've converted, you did your PhD, you have a doctorate. So how those dots are connected? Many in the field, they actually think about going into academics, not just about just to teach it, but also do the research and get a PhD. So how your journey has been like? Where you started your career, what inspired you to become a designer and get to this point in your career? So
Sure. Yeah. So I think probably the story starts with technology. So I've always been a tech geek, even, as a young kid, when I was, let's say 30 years ago, when I was 10-ish, I ran something called a BBS. I don't know if you know what that is. It was like a pre-internet server, right? As a server, people could call in through the phone, right? So that's where my mind was at while I was a young person. So I went to Ryerson, which is now Toronto Metropolitan University, to study computer science because I love technology. I love computers. And I took a few programming courses in high school, and I loved it. I really took to it. So I started studying computer science. And the plan at that point was to become a programmer, right? To write code. And what happened was about 2 years into my undergraduate, I met a researcher there. Her name was Dr. Deborah Fells. And so she is a professor at Toronto Metropolitan. And so she hired me, I think in my 3rd year university, she hired me as a research assistant to work in her lab. So at the time, that lab was called the Center for Learning Technology. Now it's called the Inclusive Media and Design Center. And what we did at this lab was we used technology to try and give access to people with disabilities, to give them access to media, right? To fun stuff. Because a lot of the focus, so accessibility is a big part of product design. And a lot of the focus of accessibility went to sort of the quote important stuff, right? Banking, legal, making sure you can intersect with your government, things like that. But we were like, well, that's not what life is all about, right? Life is about movies and TV and culture and sharing with your fellow man. So what we did is we did all sorts of really exciting accessibility projects around media. So for example, we worked on enhanced closed captioning. So for example, you've probably seen closed captions. And if you've seen a horror film, right, with closed captions, you'll notice when the scary music plays, it just says scary music plays at the bottom, right? And that's not very scary. So we tried to use like design and technology to then convey that emotion in another way, right? Through a different mode. So I stayed at this lab. I started working on these projects in this lab, and the plan again was to just do an undergrad and sort of and bounce. But so I stayed. I did a master's degree there, and then I stayed and I did a PhD as well. And I'll just talk to you a little bit about my work that I did for my PhD. So I said we did some work in closed captioning, right, where we noticed there was a lot of information missing from that caption, right? Like especially things like music, sound effects, right? It's not really properly conveyed because it'll just say music playing. So what we worked on a really exciting project at that lab called the Emoji Chair. And what that was, so our first attempt was to try and use the visual mode, right? To make, so if we had a caption that was happy, we would maybe animate it so it seemed happy or something like that. But so now we're gonna do a different mode. We're gonna do touch, right? Tactile. And so what we did is we tried to convey sound through touch, right? So we devised this vibrotactile interface called the Emoji Chair, which was a chair that you sit in, and it had 16 voice coils in it. And then we would pump audio through there and we would filter it. And so that the low parts would go on the butt of the chair and the high parts would go on the, let's say, the higher part of the back, right? And so what we were trying to do is convey like sound effects, convey music, convey like, if you're watching a movie and all of a sudden there's a huge explosion, right? And it shocks you, right? We want someone to not to read shocking explosion. They're going to feel a shocking explosion and be shocked, right? So they can shake and share the experience like everybody else, right? So what I did in my PhD was because what we were doing was conveying sound and pumping it through your tactile sense, right? Now, clearly or obviously, a lot of the sound information we send through your skin is not received, right? Because your skin, the fidelity of the sensors in your skin are way lower than in your eardrum, right? So what I did was I created essentially a new system of music and a keyboard that plugs into the chair that then only plays frequencies that and note differences that you can feel. Because right. My idea was, okay, I want to stay within the domain of the vibrotactile capabilities, right? So for example, the frequency range is much smaller on your skin, right? It's from about, like your hearing range goes up to about 20,000 hertz, where your skin, it's really 2,000, up to 2,000. And then what happens is you lose the ability to differentiate when it goes up high. Yeah. So you only have, if you're going to make a musical system with that small range, you have fewer notes, because the other thing too is you have to space the notes much further apart, right? Because if I play two notes on the piano that are right next to each other and you feel those notes, they'll feel the same, even though you can hear the difference, right? Yeah. Okay. So now I made a keyboard now, so what that means is you get 8 notes, 8 frequencies that you can use. So what I did was then I created 8 spots or 5 different spots on the chair to sort of mimic octaves, right? So now you could have 200 hertz playing at your back and 200 hertz playing on your butt. And they could be independent, right? So what I did is I had composers come in and I said, okay, I know you've never seen this before and this is brand new, but I want you to compose a happy song for me, right? And they did, right? They were musicians. They said, okay, let's do it. And then I took those songs and I played them for other people. And I said, okay, you tell me what's the emotion, right? And it turns out you can have a happy and sad vibrotactile song, right? And it works as you'd expect, which is the faster the song is and the higher frequency it is, the happier it's perceived. And it makes perfect sense because that's how audio is, right? Usually happy songs are much faster, the tempo's faster, frequencies maybe a little bit higher. So long story is that's where I ended up kind of in the design area, design research area, right? I started as this programmer, but then went through this lab and learned all this research stuff, all this design stuff, because we were constantly building, designing prototypes and testing them, right?
Sure.
And so, I did a PhD in human factors engineering because it was related to all the stuff I was doing. And that's that keyboard I built as part of that work. So come to the end of my PhD, and, I guess the plan, again, everybody has a plan until they get punched in the face. That's my favorite quote from Mike Tyson, right? So my plan at that time was to be a professor, right? New plan. But that plan didn't work out so much. And so I got really frustrated with academia, actually. So I left and I thought, well, there's this thing now, because this would have been about 2010 or 11. This was about 13 years ago. So at that time, UX was a newer thing, right? It wasn't really established. Like UX designer wasn't a super common term. It was web designer, right? Was the term. And so UX, UI was just sort of starting to emerge. And I thought, well, geez, I just studied all of this. I'm perfectly aligned for this new thing called UX design.
Right.
And so I went out. So I worked with the banks for a couple of years. That was my first kind of professional gig, right? Because when you're in an academic lab, right, you got all the time in the world, you got no profit motive, right? You can just kind of do whatever you want. But so then I experienced what it's like to work in a bank, right? In a big corporation with big systems. I did that for a number of years as a UX designer. And then, I sort of moved around about every 2 years. I wanted to kind of get a sense of everything, so I got the big bank experience for about 2 years. And then I joined a small company that made coaching software, and I designed for them for a few years, and I got that experience. And then I went to go work for Loblaw. So I'm not sure if you know, Loblaw is the biggest retailer in Canada, one of the biggest. And we made my team, we built the Shoppers Drug Mart mobile app. That's Shoppers Drug Mart is it's kind of like Rexall in the US. Huge, thousands of pharmacies across the country, retail pharmacies. And so that brings me to now. So now I'm at this company called Maple, leading a design team. And what we do at Maple is we connect people to doctors through technology, right? So I don't know how well you're in the US right now. So I'm in Canada, and we have public health. Okay, public health is great, but it's not perfect. So one of the flaws of public health, at least currently, is I can't find a doctor in my city. So I live in a city called Barrie, and my family just moved here about 2 years ago, and I do not have a GP. I can't find one. They're not available. And the clinics here, the walk-in clinics, they've said, we won't serve you unless you have a GP.
It's a catch-22, right? I mean, you don't have a GP, and so basically, even though there is a free healthcare, access to healthcare becomes even more difficult.
Exactly. And so for a while I was having trouble. But Maple, I use Maple. Like, I work for Maple, but I love the tool because, let's say I have 3 kids, 3 young daughters. And I have a 2-year-old, and the 2-year-old goes to daycare. So that means she's constantly getting eye infections, right? All sorts of infections. Now, imagine the situation that I'd have to do to get her a prescription for her pink eye, right? Normally, I'd have to take time off work, right? Drive her to a clinic, wait in the clinic with other sick people, right? Maybe get the prescription, right? That's like, it's an all-day thing. Whereas Maple, I do it on my couch, right? I do it on my couch. It says, connecting with a doctor now. And then, it says, hey, can you take a picture of the eye? And we send it up. And the experience, when you're finished, you're like, holy mackerel, that was amazing. That was so easy, And so that's what I like about this, I think you'll notice a lot of the things I designed for, like you said earlier, are things that at least in theory should help people, right? And this one, I jumped at the opportunity to do this because you're connecting people with doctors,
right?
Like that's help as pure as it can be, I think.
So while you're doing the product designer, in the current role in the product director of product design at Maple.
Yeah.
It is in. So, what are the challenges generally one faces when designing for healthcare?
Okay, so one, it's more complicated. So number one is, especially in Canada, there's rules, there's regulations that you have to be aware of, right? That would limit otherwise, like you might come up with a great idea,
Right.
right? That makes sense. It's good for the business. It's good for the user. It's good all around. But no, there's a regulation that says, oh, this type of doctor can't prescribe in this jurisdiction, and so you're much more limited, right? The some of those solutions to overcome, oh, we're having a shortage. Oh, okay. The designer in me starts thinking, oh, well, let's do this, let's do that, let's create efficiencies, right? But no, there's rules, right? And even like recently, the government has so when COVID was going, they were paying. So we have a single payer system. So the Ontario government pays doctors, right? And so we have billing codes. So in order to get paid, you need a billing code for a service. So for virtual care, they were paying a certain amount of money. It was I think it was about $40 a visit, right? But the government has now have that, right? And so that kind of puts us in a tricky spot that now as a designer, we have to figure out, okay, now what? Now what do we do? Now that the government doesn't want to pay for these, pay as much for these things. So we have to come up with even more clever ideas, but then we're limited by those regulations again, right? So it's this constant
I
battle.
understand this. I mean, when I was working with Santander back in the day, I do realize that they were actually built upon acquiring different banks which are already out there. And that's how they grew. And lots of these banks have their own IT systems on which the entire applications were built. So what happened was that once you have the design solution, you have to sit with all the teams of the engineering people, and they'll tell you that, okay, we cannot fetch this data from such and such bank. So this actually for the universal experience, we can't actually put it. Then you have to have the marketing people and the others, but then comes the legal team. And the legal team will go, you can't use that word, or this phrase is absolutely a big no unless you are inviting a class action lawsuit. And so by the time we actually have to run through with all the departments of the feasibility checks and the compliances checks and regulations pass by, what we had in the end was something that everybody hated. But there was no other way. There's no other way to actually get out of what we have come up with. But fortunately, it wasn't so bad, because in the end, it was still the best that the bank could offer. And that is not just the handicap of this particular bank, but every other bank was facing something similar. So I do understand the frustration that whenever there is a external body or regulatory body involved, you have to make sure that certain changes are done and everything is amended, and then you are dealing with not just the one use case that you're actually setting out to do, but the different users and their needs. And they are there because it is mission critical software for them, be it a banking situation or the solution that you just spoke of. I think it is amazing that, that sort of a thing actually exists. I mean, if you think about it, a few years back, nobody would imagine that, okay, I can just call my doctor and just on a video call, I can get a prescription and a consult.
Yeah, exactly. And even, you mentioned getting together with the engineers. For some reason, the tech situation in the medical field, like we're still sending around faxes. I'm not sure if you're aware of this. I don't know if they do this in the US, but one of the primary channels of communication is a bloody fax machine. So it goes to the way you send a prescription to a pharmacist is you fax it. Because you know why? Because email is not secure, quote unquote. And I'm like, faxes aren't secure. What are you talking about? So
and who is going to receive it is again going to be a question.
Exactly. So that's just one example, but the whole system is infested with that sort of, oh, hey, let's use this 20-year-old technology that's really awesome and it'll make everything efficient. Nope, can't do it. Why? I don't know. We just can't. right? So that's a very common thing in the medical field that I didn't see in, say, like coaching. When I did coaching, there's no regulations about coaching, right? So you just kind of do whatever, not whatever, but you're much more free. Or especially in an academic setting where we're just studying ideas for the sake of studying ideas, right? And there's no real product that has to be released, much more free, right?
Okay, so going into that direction, I have really important questions to discuss with you when it comes to the academia and the UX and the current market trends. But before I get there, I really like to know more the you. I mean, the professional you is quite, your CV is, or resume is something to be envious of. And I am sure with the experience that you actually bring to the table. So let's go to the fun section and do some rapid fire questioning and see that if we can find who Carmen is.
Sure.
All set?
Yeah, let's do it.
So what is the coolest feature in your home that you really love?
The coolest feature? Well, it's probably the room I'm in right now, which is, so I converted so we have a separate garage on the property, and I converted it, what used to be a workshop, but I converted it into my office / music studio / I do gardening too. So I have, like over here, I have a whole bunch I have my seedlings all ready to go. So as soon as the snow melts, they're ready to rock. But so like I said already, I have 3 young girls. So it's kind of an oasis that I can retreat to and do my man stuff in here.
So you also use it as a man cave.
Oh yeah. I'm a musician. So whenever I play out here, and then the kids can be undisturbed by that. So.
All right. So what is your lazy go-to dinner?
Lazy go-to dinner? Burger and fries. Because I have a very pure way of, it's just get the meats, flatten it down, fry it up. And I got a fryer, fry up the fries. And that's a good meal. About 10 minutes it takes me. Well, it's really just waiting for the oil to heat up. That's the longest part.
That's the longest. And so books or movies?
A couple years ago, I would have said movies, but man, there's nothing original in Hollywood right now. I think every single movie out right now is a sequel of a previous movie. So maybe I'll say books right now, because I have been trying to dabble in books a little more lately.
All right. So here I can recommend a film, RRR. If you haven't seen it, it's on Netflix. Bollywood plug. It's an Indian film, and that you might enjoy. And I recently watched All Quiet on Western Front, the German film.
That one, I did see that. That one was, and also 1917 was quite incredible. Same as
Okay. So next one, what is your favorite book then? Any book that you want everybody to read?
Okay, you know what? I'll give you a designy one that's a little less cliche, because everyone says, emotional design, Don Norman, all those books. But I read this book by a guy named Golden Krishna. First of all, awesome name. So he wrote a book called The Best Interface is No Interface. And I don't have it in my bookshelf because I can't find a paper copy of it. You should be able to find an ebook. But what it is he talks about how as designers, we get in, that when you're a hammer, everything seems like a nail, right? And as designers, especially visual designers and UI designers, right? Every time there's a problem, we're like, hey, let's make a UI, right? But the whole thesis in the book is, no, actually, a lot of times, like he brings up an example of the Mercedes-Benz app, right? That opens up the car door. And he says, you have to imagine you're walking to the car with groceries in your hand. You got to get the app out, open it, log into the phone, log into the app, find the door unlock, then unlock it, right? He's like, no, that's terrible. It should just know that you're there and it should unlock, right? So that's a book I highly recommend all designers check out.
Cool. All right. And what is the one thing you wish you have enjoyed more?
I wish I enjoyed more. Yeah, I think, you know what? I think I'll give sort of, maybe this is a cop out answer, but kind of, I think everything. Like, I think, I saw this good meme once where it was like, when I was in elementary school, I was dying to get into high school. When I was in high school, I was dying to get into college. When I was in college, I was dying to start my first job, right? When I had my first job, I was dying to whatever, do the next thing, the next thing, the next thing. But I think I wish I had just, sometimes just, you got to sit back and smell the roses a little bit, and not always worry about the next thing and just kind of live in the moment a little bit. I think I did far too much forward thinking. And I'd say, looking back, I wish I'd done a little more, I don't know, shoegazing maybe.
So, did you have a nickname while growing up? Maybe in the college, universities, anywhere?
No, I was never really a nickname guy. No. I think my name is so unique that maybe people didn't see the need for it. I don't know.
You're just Carman.
That's it. I want to know.
Do you think you would make a good spy?
A spy? Oh, no. So I'm Italian. I'm half Italian. I wear my emotions on my sleeve, right? I cannot hide my emotions at all. If you said something I think is wrong, you'll know it. My face is going to show it. So no, I'd be a terrible spy.
Right. So, well, that was quite a bit of a, quite a few things that we actually gone through there. And I think this is where we can actually go back to the academia and the, designing in theory part. So I did my graduation from Bristol in UK. And because it was with the designing, a lot of the stuff and the procedures that they actually teach you about getting those sign-offs and waivers and getting consent forms okay, and the documentation is too much. In real world, there is hardly you get very limited opportunity to actually go or do things in the UX research by the book. But that actually changes a lot of the places that whenever you are designing something or trying to practice your profession, it's never going to be the same as they are actually teaching in academia. So current trends as they stand right now, everybody is talking about ChatGPT, everybody is talking about AI and UX. So what is the current scene in the academia about artificial intelligence and design?
I don't know too much about the official kind of thought in academia around AI. I do see, I see a lot in the field. There's a lot of concern over AI. I think a lot of people are worried about unemployment, right? Especially, people that wouldn't traditionally be worried about that are, there's that petition going, there's a few petitions going around. I know Elon Musk started one where he's like, hey, we gotta pause on this for 6 months. And, I've seen some of my colleagues post up on LinkedIn, hey, I just signed this. So I think UX is feeling they're a little bit nervous. They're nervous, right, about it. And I don't know, I'm taking a pretty optimistic approach to AI, especially like even this newest version. I think because I was a technologist, right? I kind of know about technology, and I look at when Excel, what was the first version of Excel called? It was called Lotus 123 or something like that, right? When that first came out, probably a lot of accountants were very scared, right? They were like, man, I'm gonna lose my job. But I think what happened is instead of there being fewer accountants, what happened was there was more accounting, way more. Like now we're doing 100 times the accounting, and we still need those accountants, right? And so, like, let me give you an example. Is I think with ChatGPT, we're gonna do more UX. We're gonna do more research, right? Because now, so I work for a pretty small company. We don't have a huge team. We don't have dedicated researchers. But you know what I did the other day is I took interview transcripts, right? And I put it into ChatGPT and I said, extract themes for me. And it did. right?
Wow.
And they were pretty good. And but like it's still now I'm gonna have to look through it. I'm gonna have to double check and sort of make sure it's on track. But that's something. So that's leveraged me up. That allows me to do way more research, right? Way more analysis than I ever could before. And it's not like there's a lack of stuff to research, right? We're gonna fill that up very quickly, you know.
That's an amazing use case that you just said. I mean, giving
Yeah.
by the example, I saw this photo in 1988, teachers protesting against the use of calculators in school. But, it happened. Then there was in India back in the early 80s or mid 80s when they decided to bring on computers, there was huge protest that people will be unemployed and should not get computers to the country and it is going to be bad for the economy. Now look at India, the largest soft power in the world. I mean, without software, where we would be? I mean, without computers, there was no way for India to be where it has actually reached. So I think same thing is here, but I completely get on with what you're just saying, that on the design side, any consumer who is actually sitting and consuming the design or the product or the service that you're offering, there has to be a human touch. I was looking at this Galileo.ai. What they are doing is that if on the command prompt you write down that I need a login screen with these editable fields, it will give you a Figma output, perfectly aligned and designed. But then if you think about it, you have to take that file, put it in a design system because all the layers will be different from one another.
Yeah.
And then somebody has to feed the information that what do you want, because it is always going to be garbage in, garbage out. They can do the generative AI for you, but what to generate, it's still going to be that human input based on which they are going to generate the output. But I think you provided one of the best possible use cases about getting so you have done a user testing session on your product, just get the transcript, feed it to the system and get the summary. I think that is amazing way of using AI.
I think people misunderstand what the important part of your job is, right? Because I think when designers are solving problems. That's our job, right? And we do that by drawing things in Figma, let's say, usually, right? But the Figma drawing part is not the value. It's the solving part that's the value, right? It's just that's what we have to do right now to get to the goal, right?
Absolutely.
So I think people think, oh no, they're taking away my drawing from me, so I'm done as a designer. But I'm like, no, that's the boring part. Right? Who wants to go through Figmas and adjust borders or whatever? I don't want to do that. I want to solve problems and just tell some AI, hey, AI, fix all the padding. Shoot, and it fixes it, right? We want to focus on, I like to solve like human problems, right? You mentioned the calculator. I don't know what 13 times 15 is. I wouldn't trust it myself to do it, right? And I don't care really. I want to use the calculator to build a rocket to get to the moon. I don't want to do math, right? But I have to do math if I want to build the rocket, right? You see that? And so people, what they mistakenly believe is people want the cow, not the milk, right? People want milk. So we just have to remember that. And I think we're going to be fine. I think I'm optimistic.
Not wanting cow, but the milk. Wow.
Right.
That's
Yeah.
Yeah, fantastic.
Right.
So this is where again I have to come to you and ask about the current way in which academia and UX are entangled. How does it, are they updating any rules and the way they actually seeing, or the confusion that people generally have about what is product design, what is user experience design, the perception of it. So how are you justifying it or differentiating it for anybody?
So I think UX and academia. So academia is definitely trying, because so when I went through academia, there was no thing called UX, right? So I did the pieces, but sort of on my own. And so now now, for example, like I taught at a university in Ontario called Wilfrid Laurier, as in their UX design program. Like they have a specific program. Another thing they're doing is a lot of the university, like the University of Toronto, which is a big graduate school. It's a top 20 graduate school in the world. Or I developed a course for York University for their certificate. So a lot of them, what they're doing is they're doing these kind of like, they're not boot camp, but in the style of like continuing education, where it's, it's not part of a degree or diploma program. It's just these certificates. Mm-hmm. So that's what they're doing. And I think the theoretical part is good and hasn't really changed much, really. Like a lot of the theory and stuff comes out of like the 50s, like Paul Fitts and stuff working in World War II bombers and stuff. A lot of that comes from that work, human factors engineering. Like Fitts' law. Have you ever heard of Fitts' law? That's Paul Fitts, right? So a lot of that theory is really solid and they do a good job of that. And I also think people should know the theory, right? But what they don't do a great job with is the reality of real problems in a business sense, right? Like, you always do a project, let's say you do a UX course. You always do like a perfectly end-to-end product, right? It's a brand new thing. There's no conflicts. There's no like weird integrations. There's no, and all the typical stuff you'd experience in the real world. And so one thing, I was thinking the other day, what I would love to do if I get back into academia, or even I've been talking to some profs, even just to guest speak in a class, is have you ever played Dungeons and Dragons?
Yes.
Yeah. Okay. So
part of the company.
Right. So that in that game, there's a dungeon master. Right. And what the dungeon master does is sort of simulates the world. Right. And so I think there's room for Dungeons and Dragons style practice for UX students. So let me give you an example. So what I would do is, and I actually stole this idea from a psych professor I had when I was doing my Ph.D. So what he did was he was going to tell us about this a case study, a psychological case study. And he said, so instead of me just telling you, you're going to explore the case study with me. Right? You need to ask questions. You need to figure it out yourself, and I will tell you the answers. Right? So the case was about this guy in France in the 1820s, and he was in an insane asylum, and he could only say tan. He could only say tan. So that's all he told us, the professor. Right? And then he's like, okay, ask me questions. And I was like, oh wow, this is so engaging. So I said, okay, can he follow instructions? Yes, he can follow instructions. Oh, okay, that's interesting. And then you follow the case. So what I think is missing in UX is that exact thing, but for a UX problem. So for example, you'd say, okay, I'm in this company X. We have a conversion flow in our checkout, and conversion right now is 15%. And we want it to be 20. Okay, go. Right? And so now the class is going to ask me questions, right? Probe, start, like, okay, so they're going to say, well, can we look in the data? Can we see what's the data analytics showing us about where people are dropping off? Oh, that's great. And I'll reach in as the dungeon master. Here's the data for you, right? Because I think what in school, like you're limited in time when you're in a class, right? You only have 3-4 months, right? So a lot of these UX problems, it takes that is a 2-week endeavor. And so we have to figure out a way how to simulate and practice, right? Because I find that's what's really missing in UX education is practice, right? Because universities do theory. They're really good at theory, right? Like physical theory, chemistry, but design is a practice, right? It's like being a musician. You can know about all the music theory in the world, but does that make you a good musician? Probably not. In fact, most music teachers I know aren't very good at playing music, right? Because it's a different skill set. So that's what I'm saying is designers need to practice. And I think they do get a little bit of it with the class projects and stuff, but I feel ultimately it lacks that realism, and that I don't know, just that sense of exploration and being a detective, and yeah. So that's where I think academia and UX is.
Right. I think it is the one thing that, we were talking, and then you said that you also provide coaching to up and coming designers or people who are
Yep.
starting in the industry, and you do the coaching and mentoring sessions. So, what about that? What sort of the planned coaching that you actually provide?
Yeah, so I've just started actually. I just started with a few folks. Mostly they're juniors who are either looking for a new position, or like one person I'm talking to right now is they're a little bit worried about where their company's going. So maybe they're looking for the next phase. So they want to beef up their resume, beef up their portfolio, right? As someone like I do hiring, so I can speak to designers as what's my perspective when I get your resume in front of me, right? I take them through that. And basically, like I said, I was a teacher for a long time at universities and stuff, and I love doing that, but I got a little frustrated with the constraints of that. And so I just want to continue that and doing that on my own and still helping. I love to help people, especially, getting a junior person started up in their career is super rewarding. So
Hmm. So,
definitely going to be doing more of that in the future.
So that is something really exciting. And people who are watching this or listening to it, the email address is cbranje@gmail.com, on which you can actually get in touch with
Yeah.
Carmen. He's also on LinkedIn with the same name as this podcast have in the URL. Also, the email address cbranje is also available in the description of this podcast. So if you are interested in getting in touch with him, I bet there is tons to learn and explore the ideas that he has to offer. So I think this has been a productive conversation, Carmen, and I believe that it doesn't matter which part of the world that you are living in, which country you reside in. The most of the values that remain intact about the user experience and human connections, they are always hold true. And the similar sort of sentiment that actually run throughout the course of humanity. I mean, it doesn't matter if you live in Asia, Europe, Africa, America. There, there is a connection that actually brings us all together.
Yep. Absolutely.
So, thank you very much for joining this podcast. I thank
You.
you from my heart. And with all the listeners out there, thank you very much for joining in, and stay tuned for the new episodes next week. All right. Have a wonderful day ahead.
Thanks. Bye bye.